Thank the gentleman from Maryland. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland.
Madam Secretary, I want to thank you for giving us a play-by-play of what happened in Tunisia. Could you do the same thing of what happened in Benghazi? Could you tell us the same kind of play-by-play that who came to the rescue there? Because I don't know of anybody that did. So I don't know who you called and their lack of ability to get anybody there. It's just hard for me to comprehend why you would give us that blow-by-blow of something that we're not even investigating here, but we appreciate it. But I do want to ask you.
Well, Congressman, if I could,
sure.
Several of you have raised the video and have dismissed the importance of the video. And I think that is unfortunate, because there's no doubt, and as I said earlier, even the person we have now arrested as being one of the ringleaders of the attack on our compound in Benghazi is reputed to have used the video as a way to gather up the attackers that attacked our compound.
I didn't do it.
So I think it's important. These are complex issues, Mr. Congressman, and I think it's important that we look at the totality of what was going on. It's like that terrible incident that happened in Paris.
I got you.
Cartoons sparked 2 Al-Qaeda trained attackers who killed, nearly a dozen people. I think it's important that as you are members of Congress looking into these issues, that you look at the totality so we can learn the best lessons to try to.
Yes, ma'am. Well, reclaiming my time, let me ask you about a little thing. You said that you spent a lot of sleepless nights, and I can't imagine. And you said you often wondered what you could have done different. What did you come up with?
Oh, a long list, Congressman.
Just give me your top 2.
Well, to go back to the point that Congresswoman Duckworth was raising about contractors, if we'd had a more reliable security force in large enough numbers, well-armed and well-focused
I didn't do it.
on protecting
our
compound.
What could you have done different than what you did do?
Well, I'm trying to tell you, I think if the militia that had been engaged by both the CIA and the State Department had been more reliable.
You were able to find $20 million to support increased security forces in Libya, yet we weren't able to find money to support your own people on the ground.
But you didn't have anything to do with that, you said.
But I made a long list, Congressman, about anything that anybody could have done. And that's how I looked at it. I looked at it from the perspective of what are the many pieces. Contracting is a part of that.
I didn't do it.
There are many other issues that we need to address. That's really the main reason I'm here, to continue to try to do what I can to honor those who were lost and to make sure that we are well prepared to try to prevent. Now, we know we can't prevent everything. That's the way the world is, but to do the very best we can, and there are many elements that go into that.
So contractors would be number 1. What would be number 2?
Well, if there had, I don't think that's an unimportant point. We had a militia, we had an unarmed static force that probably couldn't have done much more. It should, I think, inspire us to look for ways to get host countries to permit there to be more dedicated security forces, well enough armed and trained to be really a force to protect our compounds and our other facilities.
You were able to find $20 million to support increased security forces in Libya, yet we weren't able to find money to support your own people on the ground.
That would have perhaps made a difference.
Okay.
It certainly, might have made a difference if we had more help from the CIA.
I didn't do it.
There on the compound, if maybe we had a rotating presence. But I have to say, in reviewing a lot of the analyses that have been made by security experts, very well-trained, experienced security people.
I didn't do it.
They're not sure that anything would have stopped the attackers. And I know that Admiral Mullen, when he went into his work for the ARB, was concerned that none of the diplomatic security officers had fired a shot. They had their weapons, they hadn't fired a shot.
I'm not trying to cut you off, and I've tried to be nice, and you're doing well. We both talk slow, so let's give each other a little breathing room here. You talked about Miss Victoria Newland. You know her, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. This was her briefing on September the 13th. Some reporter named Elise had asked her a question about the security, and her response was, "I'm going to reject that, Elise. Let me tell you what I can about the security of our mission in Benghazi. It did include a local Libyan guard force around the outer perimeter. That guard force never showed up that night, and it did not normally patrol the outer perimeter. The only people that patrolled the outer perimeter was the unarmed Blue Mountain." But she said, "This is the way we work in all of our missions, all around the world, that the outer perimeter is responsibility of the host
Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision.
government," which there wasn't really a host government at the time. There was obviously a physical perimeter barrier, a wall, and then there was a robust American security presence inside the compound. I don't think 5 DS agents not fully equipped or armed for what they were facing, you could call a robust American security presence?
Well,
Would you have used the word robust?
I would certainly have said that the security on that night was reliant on a militia that did not perform
I didn't do it.
as had
I'm not
been
talking about the
expected.
militia on the outside. I'm talking about the robust
Well,
American presence on the inside.
it was considered robust in the sense that the request had been for 5 diplomatic security officers to accompany the ambassador. There were 5 there. And they did, as I have testified to, the very best they could. They were armed. And in the course of the thorough investigation conducted by the Accountability Review Board, as I was saying, Admiral Mullen zeroed in on this, having more than 40 years experience in the military.
Did you personally review our security situation as the previous ARB required?
And he wanted to know why the DS agents had not fired their weapons. And they explained, as many since have heard who have interviewed them, their assessment was that it would have resulted in the loss of even greater life. And they chose not to. And Admiral Mullen reached the conclusion that they acted appropriately. So even though we had the 5 DS agents that had been requested, they were overrun and unable to do more than they did.
They were overrun because they didn't have any defensive positions to fight from.
You were able to find $20 million to support increased security forces in Libya, yet we weren't able to find money to support your own people on the ground.
Because they refused to give them additional sandbags because they did not want it to look like a military compound. I've heard that testimony. I want to ask you about the FEST. Are you familiar with the FEST?
Yes.
What is the FEST, Madam Secretary?
It is an emergency support team to help stand up embassies that have, or consulates or other facilities that have been impacted by either natural disasters or some kind of attacks. Exactly.
Kidnapping. And where are they located?
They're located in the United States.
At Langley Air Force Base?
I'm not sure of where they're located now.
They're there, and it's an interagency task force. Includes the FBI, I guess the DOD, and the State Department. And if you look at the State Department website, FEST comes up under that, so I'm assuming that you are the lead in those agencies.
It's an interagency effort.
Okay. But it was deployed in 1998 in Kenya, correct? After the embassy bombing there of the
Right.
towers, and to Tanzania, correctly?
That's correct.
They were there, ready to go on short notice. They said they could have been ready in 4 hours to leave. And this is the group of people that would go into a situation, as you described, when an embassy had been overrun, attacked, kidnapping, or whatever, to basically give guidance to any of the other forces or help that was coming in, correct? And I know that your staff, and we've got a number of emails from your staff, that originally recommended that that you send the FEST team. And I think they may have talked to Mr. Sullivan, or it was somebody that got an email, and they said they would pass it up the chain. And somebody made the decision not to send the FEST team, which would have been, as Secretary of State, I would think, since it was a State Department-led mission, that would have been the first thing that you would have wanted to get out. But instead, if I understand correctly from the email chain, your first request was to see how soon the FBI could get over there. Is that a true statement?
Well, Congressman, the FEST went to East Africa to help rebuild our embassy capacity. They have expertise in once our 2 embassies were bombed, how do we regain communications, for example? We were not going to rebuild in Benghazi, so there was no reason to send a FEST team. There was a reason to try to get the FBI investigators into Benghazi as soon as it was safe for them to go, so they could start to try to build a case so we could bring the perpetrators of the attack to justice. That was absolutely the primary goal that we had in working with the FBI. And I think it's, when we make a decision on a deployment of the FEST, it is not just the Secretary of State. In this case, there was the NSC involved, there was the CIA involved, there was a civets about it.
I didn't do it.
And the considered conclusion was, we're not going to rebuild in Benghazi. So yes, we did not.
Well, that was a quick
send FEST.
decision to make that night, that you were not going to rebuild in Benghazi.
Well, the FEST would not
Well,
have.
but
There was
now, I
nothing to
understand,
rebuild.
but you just mentioned all the agencies that would have been important to get on the ground as quick as possible and summarize what the situation was to give you that direction. But I know I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I do want to say what Ms. Roby was trying to get you to say is, what decisions did you make in regard to Benghazi, and what were you responsible to make? And I think that's what all of us want to know. What did you do? And what decisions did you make?
I didn't do it.
And you said everybody else is responsible for everything else. What were you responsible for?
I was responsible for sending Chris Stevens to Benghazi as an envoy. I was responsible for supporting a temporary mission.
You were able to find $20 million to support increased security forces in Libya, yet we weren't able to find money to support your own people on the ground.
That we were constantly evaluating to determine whether it should become permanent in Benghazi. I was responsible for recommending Chris Stevens to be the ambassador. I was responsible for working on the policy both before and after the end of the Gaddafi regime. I was responsible for quite a bit, Congressman. I was not responsible for specific security requests and decisions. That is not something I was responsible for. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision.
I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do it.